and more of a presentation. But I usually do pictures to kind of keep myself focused. So what helps me, we could talk about it and see where you guys are. One of the things that, in order to understand what we do and how we do it, you kind of have to understand how the grid works and how energy is paid for and delivered. So yeah, I'm going to just run through some real basic stuff on that so that we can all get to the same page, and then we can start talking about, obviously our background is particularly solar because it's the most elegant solution in my opinion and the easiest to understand and quite frankly the best solution. So let me do that and we'll see if this is too basic we can stop. If it makes sense, it should help. So what you guys are probably way more advanced than everybody else. You understand that when you turn on the switch, the power comes from somewhere. But there are so many people out there that we deal with who are even in the field who don't really think about how the energy gets delivered to a location and what they use it for. So I always like to take people backwards. This is our main plant in New Hampshire. This is the Merrimack station. It's 500 megawatts. This plant was built in the 1960s. It's still generating electricity for us today. The gray stack on the left is the scrubber. Have you heard about that? This plant was releasing too much mercury because obviously it's aged. And this thing was built to the tune of 420 million, give or take, for the purpose of scrubbing some of that mercury out of the air. So we just took a 60, 50-year-old plant and just added another $500 million to it, and who knows how long this plant's going to run. But to give you a scale, that's the coal pile for the Merrimack station, and this is one of those major backhoes. Now, until that scrubber was built, we were getting all of our coal from South America, predominantly Venezuela. Venezuela. So, because they had the cleanest, low sulfur coal. So we weren't even burning American coal at one point. This is what American coal mining, your mountaintop removal. I'm just going to blaze right through this stuff. This used to be a mountain in West Virginia, and all they did is basically took the top of the mountain and kind of plugged it in right here. You can see the bottom of a stream. This used to be a stream going between two mountains. And what they do now is they just take the top of the mountain, shove it in between the two mountains, and then they just strip mine the coal off the top of the what's left, because coal is in seams, and so they used to do coal mines. Now, with however they get these permits, they just kind of move the mountain aside and just take the coal off the top of the mountains. This is West Virginia. You can find these places on Google Maps all the time. It's very easy to find. It's really, really ridiculous what we're doing, in my opinion, to bring some of the energy we bring to the market. Seabrook Power Station. Do you know anything about the background of this plant? This plant was originally built for 2 reactors, 1, 2. Only reactor 1 runs. This is today. So this is reactor 2. It's not even running. It's just a rusting cap on what basically, even they admit, is one of the most expensive storage facilities in the United States. Because all they can use for it, they can't produce any energy, they can't use gas, they can't use anything. It got to this point, and then the company that was running it, which was the predecessor to PSNH, went bankrupt because you can't build a nuclear power plant. You go bankrupt. The current one that they're building now today in Georgia is $1 billion over budget, and they've only poured the foundation. So it's good to have people condense these intense conversations into sound bites, but when it gets right down, when you go behind the curtain, so to speak, and you look at what's going on, you find things like this. Companies are going bankrupt building these things. They're $1 billion over budget. Who do you think pays for that? It's the government. We talk a lot about all these other solar companies going out of business, but we just keep pumping money into these other forms of energy without trying to figure out how to do it in a better way. And instead, it just becomes this political battle. And all of this has context for the financing and funding, because when it gets right down to it, it's either government or private. And if it's government, it's going to get involved in politics. And so you have to understand the basis of what those discussions are so that you can understand what's causing and driving all the problems with difficulties in getting financing for these projects. So, very simply, and this is just a nuclear plant, you have a turbine that spins for whatever, whether it's steam, water, wind, it doesn't matter. Something spinning through a magnetic field in a generator, and you produce electricity. And that's it. That's all it is. The wood plant in Schiller, over in Newington, they basically converted one of their coal plants to wood. This is what it looks like when they drop off the wood chips. They do it so fast, they can't even, they just lift the whole trucks up. That's the only way they can get it. So these things are going, there's in 3 stages. You get one truck backing up, another ramp is clear, and then the third is in use. That one will go down, that one will go up, the other truck will back. I mean, that's all day long. They have to bring wood chips in because that plant is a 40 megawatt wood chip boiler. This is the turbine in Seabrook. So a person would be standing kind of like right here. So it's really, you may already know this, but it's very interesting to see how all of everything that's going on is basically focused on putting steam through that pipe to spin a turbine inside this container so that this generator can spin, and it produces 1.8 gigawatts of power. It's so small and fragile, and that is something that really kind of draws it to you. That one, it's a marvel of technology, but on the other side, it's a pretty critical failure point. If this turbine is not running, guess what? We're 2 gigawatts short of power. And that, who knows along that chain what could cause the problem? God forbid it, something, like a terrorist thing, but let alone that. Mechanical failures, leaks, all these kinds of stuff. It creates these systems that are just hypersensitive to real small failure problems. And so we spend an exorbitant amount of money keeping these systems online and running. Everybody gets a little more relaxed until something like Japan happens, and then everybody gets all hyped out, and then we go down. It just goes back and forth over and over again. Hydro plants. This is a Hydro-Quebec plant. You can argue day and night about how renewable it is, what it does for the environment to create a hydro plant. Even a solar field impacts the environment, but still, a hydro plant it changes the ecosystem that it's in, but it obviously produces a relatively carbon-free source of power. But one of the more interesting things going on in some of our hydro plants in the United States is, this is Hoover Dam in Arizona and Nevada. The new bridge is getting built right here. You can see it. Before that, you'd have to cross actually on this road on the top of the dam. I have this picture because of this. See the distance between in the white? That's the water level drop. That's not like a seasonal drop. That's decades of drop. And you have 2 things going on. More and more people are moving to the southwest and sucking water out of the Colorado River above the dam. And 2, the precipitation patterns are changing such that the amount of water coming down the Colorado River are much lower than they originally were. So if you can think like how hydraulics work, you can understand that this is a significant problem. Because the way a dam works is you have to get pressure to force the water through the turbine. So where's the most powerful pressure come from? The top. So as you start lowering the water, you get an exponential decrease in the amount of water pressure that comes through. Because if the water is here, you basically have just the flow of water. Once it starts going above the intake, you start getting pressure and water. So the higher you get up from the intake, the more pressure you get, the more the turbine responds to the pressure. So in this picture, we have an issue, and turbines are starting to be replaced. So our hydro plants are not even able to accommodate these kind of things that we have going on, whether it's climate change and I'm not attributing it to any particular source, but climate change, weather pattern change, whatever you want to call it, the fact that people are moving to a place where there's no water, that's whatever, it's happening, and it's affecting our grid. And so these are issues that have to be calculated when you talk about spending money for energy, because we keep punting this stuff down the line. So I talked about that fragility of the grid. This is the ice storm in Canada. Obviously, that one was pretty significant, but I never really know if I live in Newmarket, New Hampshire. Really, when there's a storm, we lose power for hours and days on end. I don't know if it affects it up here as much, but we've lost power for more than 2 days, 5 times in the last 2 years. Yep. And it's because of this kind of stuff. I mean, this was traumatic. I mean, Canada, there were parts of Canada without power for months as a result of this. And look at what's going on in New Jersey. My mother-in-law lives in Hopewell, New Jersey, and she was out of power for 8 days and out of communications for 12. And it's not getting better. So we go to the concept of distributed generation. And that's where we kind of come with this breakdown between the financing. In the traditional forms of getting energy on the grid, you have a utility company. Whether in some states it's a monopoly, some states it's been deregulated, but even in the states that it's deregulated, the government has said, utilities are so important and the provision of power and energy is so important that we're going to support that. And that support takes all different kinds of formats. In the original case, it was, you get a monopoly, like your cable company, you put in the wires, and we'll guarantee you that people have to buy power from you. And so they would pay the utilities would pay all the money, and then they would say, we need to charge this amount for every kilowatt we produce to get our money back. And that's how you get those rates. So if you look at your electric bill, you see like 5 or 6 different rates. Some of them is for the power that's generated, others are for transmission and distribution, which are the lines. Then you have these things called stranded costs, system benefits, there's all these different rates. And that's the utility going to the government and saying, we spent $420 million on that scrubber, we need to recover it from everybody out there. The government says, okay. And so this is how it works. So this company gets a guaranteed return on its money and its investment, and all of us pay for it in our electric rates. So that's the traditional funding. So what happens when you put a power plant on your house? And that's what this is. This is a wind turbine. Now all of a sudden, you're paying for this system, you're putting the power, and what happens there? This is where kind of the magic of the financing and funding comes in. So in addition, we're obviously talking, you have these kind of wind turbines, which are basically large central power plants. Probably all seen those. The scale of them, they're more up here. And then we move into solar. I want to talk about solar because it's the best example for talking about understanding how the finances of distributed generation works. And distributed generation is putting the power generation where the user is, or closer to the user, so that you don't build these giant plants. And one of the things that I think is important for us to understand how this is going to work is by going through what people like to say about solar. These are things on the left are what people usually say, it doesn't work, it's too expensive, it's too risky, and the incentives are creating this scenario where there's a false hope. What I want to take you through is debunking all those myths at once and run you through a hypothetical project and how that would get financed and how it makes sense. So, the best way is to kind of work through this whole expensive thing, because that's the number one comment. And the reason why financing these systems is so difficult is because people have such a perception that they're so expensive. So I actually grew up in Arizona, so we're going to take my mom's house and my current house, and we're going to say what would happen if I put a solar array on my mom's house versus a solar array on my house. And in order to do that, we have to create a formula. And the formula is going to be based on the amount of sun that hits the Earth at the particular location, the efficiency of the panel that converts that sun to energy, and then the value of that energy where it is. So it's a 3-part formula. So we're just going to go through the data. So we have a flat plate, tilted solar panel at latitude. So it's like 42 degrees here, 35 or whatever down here. And this is NREL. This is going to tell us how many watt hours per meter squared, I think. Let me see, it tells us. So Arizona's all red, New Hampshire's all blue, or green, sorry. And we end up with this comparison of 6.5 kilowatt hours per meter squared per day. 6.5 in Arizona, 4.49, and this is averaged over a year in New Hampshire. Okay? Everybody got that part of the formula? That's variable 1. Variable 2 is this question about it not working. And everybody says, well, it should be in Arizona because that's where all the sun is. That doesn't take into account the temperature. And temperature is important because a solar panel works way more efficiently when it's cold than when it's hot. And so what I've done is taken the average temperatures of Arizona and the average temperatures here in New Hampshire and said, all right, if we apply this temperature to the operational parameters of a solar PV panel, what kind of output are we going to get? And we can come up with that. It's the efficiency level is this. So this is the average efficiency over a year in Arizona because of the heat of the panel versus the average efficiency in New Hampshire. And normally when I talk about, there are people that do computer overclocking. You have a question?
Just real quick, so it's more efficient in New Hampshire?
Yeah, because it's colder.
Because it's colder, so there's like less movement in the electrons?
It's
along the lines of that?
yeah. There's less. It's the silicon in a solar panel is the same kind of silicon on a computer chip.
Yes.
And so when a computer chip is running, the efficiency of that chip is based on its temperature. If you overheat a computer chip, your computer will fail, and you lose efficiency. And in a solar panel, I don't know what the molecular issue is, like why the electrons transmit the electricity more efficiently, but a colder wire is a better conductor than a hot wire, because I believe a portion of the electricity that's running in the wire gets discharged as heat. And the colder it is, the more energy stays within the wire. And the same with the solar panel. If the solar panel is colder, more electricity stays in the panel rather than being given off as heat. And so there's a couple of technical journals that I cite to where they talk about the effect of temperature on solar panels. And this guy's got this great article where he says we should stop talking about putting PV panels in Saudi Arabia, and instead we should be putting them in Tibet on the top of mountains because the air is clear and it's brutally cold, and the panels will produce 20% more. And or 50% more per year, according to this guy. And then there's a UK study where they actually did it. They actually put two panels next to each other and controlled the environment around them, and they found a 40% effective rate on a 40-degree difference between the panels. So I've got, roughly about a 15% difference, so 0.13 to 0.15. That's really the difference. And this is, in our daily lives as solar project developers, we size our systems based on the output of a February day. Not July, February, because the panels are colder and they're producing more voltage. So that's the second component of our equation. So what's the last one? The last one is this expense issue. Once you have an amount of energy that comes out of the solar panel, the question is, how much is it worth? If I produce 1 kilowatt hour through my solar panel, I'm displacing 1 kilowatt hour on my electric bill. So the question is, how much is a kilowatt hour in New Hampshire versus a kilowatt hour in Arizona? So we saw Seabrook. This is the Palo Verde nuclear power plant out in Phoenix, Arizona. When Phoenix ran out of power, they just moved a couple of miles outside of the city of Phoenix, and they built this monstrosity. This is a park that this is bigger. This one reactor is bigger than Seabrook. There's 4 of them. What you can't see, you see the cooling pools for the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And it takes up a couple of square miles, and it's just plopped out there in the middle of the desert. It evaporates something like 80 billion gallons of water a year to deal with all the cooling necessary to keep these plants running. But and then here we have New Hampshire's plant. I pay 15 cents a kilowatt hour at my house. My mom pays 11 cents all in. So her rates, when you add them all up, is 11 cents. My rates, when you add them all up, is 15. So now we have our equation, which looks like this. And I even used Yuma, which has more sun than where I used to live. 6.5 kilowatt hours per meter squared per day versus 4.49. We have an efficiency average over the year of 0.13 versus 0.156. And then we have the kilowatt hour price, 0.11 versus 0.15. You multiply all 3 of those through, and you end up with the result, which shows that the dollars per meter squared of PV in Arizona is only 9 cents, whereas the value of the dollars of the meter squared of PV in New Hampshire is 10.5 cents. So it's more economical to put a solar array in New Hampshire. So all of that methodology is gone. We don't have to worry about the amount of sun. We don't have to worry about the temperature. We now understand that there are other issues associated with the economics of doing renewable energy. And so people that say over and over again, it doesn't make sense in New Hampshire, are not thinking, or incapable of thinking, or haven't spent the time to understand what generates the result of the economics with respect to solar in New Hampshire. So there's different forms of solar, obviously. There's the thermal solar. I just want to get through this really quickly. You've heard about thermal solar directly, which is producing hot water. You have that system right back there. You've seen all these systems. In a PV array, the reason why I think PV is such a smart, elegant solution is we have flat panels that connect electronically to a device that converts it to electricity. That's it, no moving parts. Maybe a fan on the inverter is the only thing that you have moving. All those other sources of energy that we went through has some kind of moving part that's a high propensity to break down. So the investment on these, we now see warranties on panels that are guaranteed output for 25 years. and 30 years. That's guaranteed output. They'll run for another 15 years. So we're looking at 40 or 50 years of lifespan that you have to run through that equation. So as the price of electricity goes up, your solar panels gain more value. So they're declining in a little bit in their ability to output, but the uptick in the electric price, you're making an investment in your power system that's going to last 40 or 50 years. So now you need to think like a utility company. So if I buy my solar array today and put it on my house, that means I don't have to pay an electric bill or a portion of my electric bill for 40 or 50 years. So then you start getting into the issue of how do I do that? And this is our array at Exeter High School. That's me. That's the size. It's a 100 kilowatt array. We have East Kingston Elementary School. I'm going to jump ahead rather than do this. Have you guys ever watched Shark Tank? Yeah. Shark Tank, the thing where the entrepreneurs come in and introduce their business.
I've never watched it, but my mom's
This guy Kevin O'Leary, he's hilarious. He's really hilarious. He always says, "Tell me about the cash." And so it's an interesting perspective to work with. So this is how we look at a system and how you look at the financing. There are the costs, and then there are the revenues. So when you're a homeowner, it's a very simple thing to say. I'm going to spend $10,000 on a solar array. I'm going to save $1,000 a year, and then I'm just throwing this out there. Therefore, I get this magical 10-year payback, or whatever you call it. What we do, and I'll use our company as an example of how you can finance these things, is we go out and buy it. So let's say you're a school, and you want to do a solar array. We come to you, and we say, all right, we will make the investment and build your solar array, and you promise to buy the power from us. And if you promise to buy the power from us for 15 years, we will be able to go out and do it. So the school says, okay, well, what's our upfront cost and what's our power rate? And that's where we say your upfront cost is nothing and your power rate is 5% below what you're paying now. So then things start really ticking for people. They say, okay, if I'm paying you less than I'm paying the grid, then the return on investment is the day I put the system in. And our response to that is, that's correct. We're saving you money the day we turn on the system. Because we, as a company, can take that promise to buy power and go get the bank to finance it. Because the bank will look and say, okay, a school's signed a contract to buy power from you for 15 years. We will loan you the money to put that system up. And that is how the utilities do it. So we've taken the power plant, putting it on a building, and we finance it the exact way the utilities finance it, only we do it more efficiently. And why? Because we don't pay for all those crazy wires and all that other stuff. Instead, you have a true, elegant power source, solar, with a free fuel that's able to produce electricity at a reduced rate. And so that's where the magic of financing happens in terms of these projects. Now, within that context, I can talk about all the different incentives that we leverage. And I will tell you something, that extra array I showed you, when we put that array up, we paid $7.50 a watt to get that thing up. Today, we are installing arrays for $3.10 a watt. And that's 3 years. So in 3 years, our price has decreased by 50%. So our costs are going down by 50%. Show me another energy source where the costs are going down by 50% in 3 years. There is not one. And that's where you start. We're going to get into we can talk a little bit about why incentives for renewable energy work. Because they're depressing prices and costs. That's what incentives are supposed to do. They're meant to transform the market so more people do it, so we figure out better ways to do it, and the prices come down. These incentives that are going out for fossil fuels where the prices continue to go up, that's catching a falling knife. Now, I understand that we have massive amounts of infrastructure in place and we need to continue that. We don't have a good holistic solution, but I don't think it's a zero-sum game. You can't say no incentives to renewables, totally let's incentivize fossil fuels. And it should be a level playing field, or we should look at them as a comprehensive approach. Nevertheless, there are incentives, so let's talk about it. There are tax-based incentives and there are rebate-based incentives. And these are called investment incentives. The idea being that if you invest in a system, you're going to get a tax benefit or you're going to get a rebate. And the states This is usually a state program, and this is almost always a federal program. So you can get a tax credit, depreciation, and then on the state you usually get something like $1 per watt based on your investment. That's what you get here in New Hampshire, 80 cents a watt or 75 cents a watt. Once you put in the system, the state sends you a check, and that's how they create the incentives. At the federal level, they give you tax benefits, so you get a tax credit and you get depreciation. Now, in my example, one of the magic things about working with the school is a school normally can't get a tax benefit. So by having a private company do the system and make the expense, the private company gets the tax incentive because they still own the system. And so we're able to leverage those tax incentives and bring them to the schools or the governments. And the government is fine with that. That's one of the very purposes of these systems, to get private-public partnerships working together so that you can do this kind of stuff. The next source of revenue is the power sales. Now, if you put a system on yourself for your own house, it's not really a sale, it's more of an offset. So you're saying, okay, I'm putting a solar array on my house, I'm going to save 15 cents a kilowatt hour. You don't pay yourself, you're just, that leaves your expense column and goes into, it disappears. So your average household expenses go down. For us, we actually send a bill. Every month we take a read of our meters and we send a bill to the school and we say, we generate this amount of kilowatts, you owe us this. As long as we're continuing to set that kilowatt rate below where they are today, they're happy because they're saving money. There are other really kind of cool things that you could do in other jurisdictions, not here in New Hampshire yet. In Massachusetts, you can actually build an array in one location and sell the power to another location. Even though the power technically doesn't go through the lines and go to that location, they meter it at the location where the array is. It goes into the grid. And then the utility company credits the account of your quote-unquote off-taker. And so we'll pump in a kilowatt here, and then 20 miles down the road, our off-taker will get a credit for that kilowatt hour on their bill. And so that's how Massachusetts has jump-started their solar program. Their solar program is one of the best in the country. Our first installation in Massachusetts was the equivalent of all of the projects we had done in New Hampshire. So for 3 years we built solar in New Hampshire and got up to about 500 kilowatts. We went down to Massachusetts and did one project in 3 months and doubled our capacity. And now we've gone, that project was done in February, and now here we are in November, and we've gone from 1 megawatt to 4.8 megawatts of solar PV because we've started focusing exclusively in Massachusetts. You can't make a business work in New Hampshire right now doing solar. And then on the last, so you can see this works. When you make an investment, you get an incentive, or a revenue through an incentive. When you produce the power, you get a revenue based on the value of that power. And then the final is a production incentive, which basically says, if you produce power, we're going to give you money based on the quality of that power. And this is a renewable energy credit or a certificate. Have you heard of those? RECs? So when you have a solar array, you produce a REC. For every 1 megawatt hour of power you produce, or 1,000 kilowatt hours, you get a REC. And a REC is something that allows a utility to comply with the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which almost every state has, even New Hampshire has one. So when a utility can't generate their own renewable power, they have to go out and buy these RECs. And the idea is that if the utility's not doing it, somebody's going to do it because they're going to produce the RECs, they're going to get the money for it, and it becomes part of the incentive plan. And so there's been a lot of debate about where the RECs levels are. In New Hampshire, the RECs were kind of hovering around $50, $40, and then there was a cap, and the cap was 155. And it could never go above 155. Last year, they lowered that cap to 55. So for some reason, unbeknownst to everybody, they just said enough's enough, and they wanted 55. In Massachusetts, the RECs are kind of the main driver of their system. The floor is at 285. So New Hampshire has a cap at 55, and Massachusetts has a floor at 285. So everything in New Hampshire, or in Massachusetts, sells above 285, and everything in New Hampshire sells below 55. Where would you do your business? I mean, that's rhetorical. But now you see what's going on. So, the complications in New Hampshire. Is it more on the cost side or the revenue side? What I've always felt is that we're starting to get more examples, more experts in this state. The experience from one place to another can move. It's supported by other places. I feel like the cost issue is being handled. I also feel like the revenue is starting to be handled. But this is where we're falling apart on the revenue side. I think that for the most part in New Hampshire, we get the cost thing. We know how much PV costs. There are people up here who can install it. This program leads to people who can install and understand these things. The other problem, it's the other side that causes the problem. There's not enough systems in New Hampshire, so people don't believe it works. Went through all of that. There's not a lot of experts here. We're not really like any other state. And we have weird taxation. There are some states that have state tax-based incentives. We can't even offer them because we don't have a taxation in this state. And the incentives in New Hampshire have been going up and down and up and down. And if you want to start a business and you want to work with a bank, you can't have the incentives change every year. Businesses do not work on a 12-month cycle. It does not take 12 months from beginning to end to do one of these projects. It takes a year and a half. And so if we're 12 months down an 18-month cycle, and the state legislature says, we don't like renewable energy, guess what? The banks say, I'm not loaning you money. Because the bank is not going to loan money to a business that's risky because the legislature changes it willy-nilly. And this is more of a policy speech than a nuts and, or this is a more policy position than a nuts and bolts. In order for New Hampshire to do what it needs to do, it's coordinated and sustained approach to financing, and that has to do with the incentives in the example. People who talk about this stuff need to understand the realities of the financing. That if you're going to have a tax-based incentive, you have to understand a little bit about how tax equity works. For instance, I have to have taxes due in order to take advantage of a tax incentive. So if I don't have any taxes due and the economy is poor, guess what? There's nobody out there who could take advantage of a tax incentive. And this debate about incentives has got, in my opinion, has got to be toned down. It's reasonable to have an incentive that declines over time. And people have been attacking it, and they've gone, like I said, from 155 to 55. That is not a decline over time. That's like an incentive cliff. And it creates all kinds of problems for the market to respond. And obviously, regulatory barriers to financing, that's something that we don't even have regulatory barriers because we really don't finance enough projects up here. When we talk about financing these systems, and in the past, these conversations have always been much more of a list because we were in the middle of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And in that case, there were like 12 programs. There are no longer 12 programs. There's not even one program. There's basically the rebate from the state PUC. So the idea of financing systems through grants and applications to the Office of Energy and Planning or the Department of Energy, that's just it's got to stop. It's got to become standard issue. This is how we do it, and it makes sense to do it. So what I wanted to do is kind of run you through two scenarios so that you can really get to understand how these systems should be financed. Can I erase a portion of your board, Wes?
Absolutely.
How do I do it? Well, this is...
Anything you want.
Okay.
Can I ask you to comment on something while you're doing that?
Yeah.
What do you think of the idea of getting rid of all incentives for all energy?
I love it, because solar would crush it. We would crush. We would be so busy. Because you know how much your price of oil would go up? And when we talk, what are the incentives for oil? I mean, there are tax incentives, there's well depreciation deductions, there's exploratory incentives.
None of it's consumer-based.
What?
None of it's consumer-based.
Exactly.
The consumer doesn't see any benefit, just the company.
That's right. And then we can get into, like Wes's kind of ground, we can talk about, what about the cost of these wars? Are these wars really about what we think they're about? I mean, how much money is spent to defend the lanes that allow oil to go back and forth across the oceans? That, in my opinion, is an incentive.
24 Saudis attack us and we go into Iraq? I mean, is that, what was the real reason for that?
Because certainly wasn't for solar. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting idea. Taking away all the incentive, Look at what it takes to get a drop of oil or a pound of coal or any of these other materials, even a cubic foot of natural gas. You got to frack the earth, you got to put a well in, you got to drill it, you got to get it, you got to treat it, you got to transport it, then you got to put it in something, then you got to burn it. In a solar panel, it's like you got to melt down some sand, make silicon, slap it between a piece of plastic and a piece of glass, and connect it to your electric box. That's it for 50 years. And all you have to do is put it in the sun. The fuel is the sun. And that's I think that people forget that about it. I like solar, and I've been trying to get this to take, but nobody really takes it. I consider solar to be domestic energy, because no matter where it is, it's pulling the fuel from where it is. The sun is the fuel. It's not gas, it's not oil, it doesn't rely on pipelines, it doesn't rely on that. It's connected to your box, and it pulls the sun that already falls on your building. And that is really brilliant, because it's the fuel that's causing the problem. I mean, we figured out how to build engines, we know how to build power plants. The problem is it's costing more and more money, and it's getting more and more ridiculous to get these fuels out of the ground. You know, we have to drill wells in the Gulf of Mexico that cost $8 billion to clean up. We've got to, basically put diesel fuel into the water aquifers below Pennsylvania. I know it's below them and everything, and of course, it's a perfectly clean and legitimate operation, and it will never ever be a problem from fracking. But that's where we are today in trying to extract these kind of fuels so that we can put them in a power plant, whereas a solar panel is legitimately just a window sitting on your roof collecting sunlight. And it's just so ridiculous to me. So let's run through, and this is a tough example because I know none of us are really building our own house. But if let us take a new family who is looking at the tough decisions of building a house, and they have their designs.
Hang on a second.
I want to just...
Yeah, probably darker. Their house, you can't see. So, they have land, they have building, and then, that with construction, and then they have, all this other soft cost. And then you have ongoing expenses, which are things like utilities, taxes, financing, etc. Financing. So this is your mortgage. And that's complicated. That's complex enough. So let's say it costs $250,000 to build this house, all in. And then the utilities are, let's say, oil, assume oil, propane, and electricity. So, 4,000? Hearing no objections. 4,000 a year. Their taxes are 6,000 a year. They live in the seacoast, where taxes are ridiculous. And they're paying off their mortgage, $250,000. They're paying about $10,000 a year. So here we have our $20,000 a year house, a year, and they spent $250,000 to put it in. So let's instead do the Green family here, Mr. and Mrs. Green, and their child Verde Green. They decide to build their house facing the correct direction so that they can do PV and some solar thermal.
Why don't you use that other green one? It'll show up better, I think.
Which other? This one?
Right? No, yeah, that one. No, not those.
Oh, okay. Permanent markers. So their land and see, I get excited about the little things: land, building, and saw cost. So they're going to do. Let's say they do 5 kilowatts of solar, and they do. Let's just say 16 tubes for a solar thermal system. Now I know that's going to be about, let's say 16,000 because they're going to be building it when the building's built, and this is going to be about 14,000. So let's say it's going to be 30. So they're going to spend 280,000, right? Same home, and we're not going to do any efficiency measures. I know Wes is going to freak out. I want to bring home this financing issue of how you think about it, because this is really the future of financing these systems. Now we have a different utility expense. So our utility expense is now, let's say this takes care of your domestic hot water, it doesn't take care of your heat, and this should be enough to offset your entire electric bill. So let's say your new utility bill, and we'll be conservative, is $2,000 a year. And your taxes are still $6,000 because in New Hampshire you get an exemption for solar systems in most communities. So there's really no impact in your taxes. And your financing charge now, instead of $10,000 a year, becomes $10,500 a year. Because that's what $30,000 does to a mortgage on a 30-year expense. So now all of a sudden, you're paying $18,500. So you just build a house with solar and you're saving $1,500 a year. Ta-da! So in this example says, you are stupid to build a house without putting renewable energy on, because you're paying more money a year. You're getting less of a house, you're paying more a year. This, yes, you're paying more for a house, but the savings blow it out of the water because you're looking at it in a 30-year time frame. None of this, when does it return it on its payback? You know, what's the return on investment? And I didn't even factor in the tax incentives. This doesn't even take into account the fact that you're going to get a rebate from the state, you're going to get a tax credit from the federal government that's going to go out, 10 years if you can't take it in the first year. This is the hard numbers, full cost, unrebated cost. You put a system on a brand new house, and that person is going to save $1,500 a year. That's it. That's how I believe financing is going to happen in the future. It relies on a new house, but just take that example and twist it everywhere you go. So this is what we do. We tell people, look, we can finance this system because we know for a fact that your power bill is going to pay off our financing because we're going to get all these other incentives. So that's really it. And the problem is because renewable energy has always been thought of, you have to go out and shell out $15,000 on day one. Everybody's forced to think through this thing of, well, how long is it going to take to pay it back? Well, if you finance it with a home equity loan or other kind of loan, where you think about where your money's going in your retirement account and what's the return on investment of that, you take this, go to the next board, and you get a more complicated response. We say, okay, if I've got, what did I say this was? $30,000. If I have $30,000 sitting in an IRA making 5% per year, what is the return on investment if I take that $30,000 and invest it in a renewable energy system, and it returns 7.5% a year because of the combination of tax incentives and cash savings from my utility bill? Where would you put your money? Now you're stupid to put your money in your retirement account because you can get your savings tax-free. Yeah, you have to be disciplined enough to take that money that you're saving and putting it back into the rest of your retirement account or something like that. But from a purely financial standpoint, we see that putting a system on a brand new house when you're financing it saves you money. And taking money out of some kind of ridiculous, and think about if you're somebody who has to sit in a bank, 0.5%. Why put money in a bank when you can put it in your energy savings on your home and save 7.5? That's 15 times the savings. And that's where we're going in financing these energy systems. We're coming up with ways to get people to get out of this box. I don't want to ever see this term ever again. Return on investment. It's because what's the return on investment of this one? 0. What's the return on investment of this one? 0. Because the day you start, you're making more money than you were before. So it's always been kind of our joke to say, the longer you wait, the less you save. And you're losing money by sitting here talking to us instead of doing this system. And that's where we turn on the head. So what's the problem with it? The deals are so complicated. This is what it looks like, when you have to deal with these complicated systems. When you get into the megawatt size, you have to have all these different people coming together, people taking tax incentives, other people loaning money, having developers, selling RECs, buying the power. You know, you get all these complex arrangements to make these larger projects happen. It just needs to be more simple. And on the residential side, what you really have is you take this and you go bank, homeowner, solar array. And that's really what you're looking at here. Only it's just a much more complicated way to do it because I'm a company here that's coming to put a solar array there to sell power there, RECs there, and tax incentives to these people, and I get some money from there, and it just gets all complicated. It can be done, it's coming, and people are thinking about it now, but the idea is that as it becomes more simple, you'll start seeing it happen more. Yeah, every once in a while you get these cool injections, like the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act comes in and chunks some money. There's some other program that chunks some money in. But that's not a sustainable way to do it. The sustainable way to do it is to get people to think this way and say, well, why don't I just do it differently? And the other reason why I'm tired of that number is, or that term, is because my first response when people say, well, and this, when is the return on investment of your solar array on this brand new house? Why would I want to do it? And my first question is, what's the ROI on your granite countertops? When does that pay back? I mean, we're talking, in some cases, the same amount of money. These granite countertops cost thousands of dollars. It's an aesthetic thing. If we're really going to talk about return on investment, let's look at every single decision. The problem is people don't make decisions for that. It's the same thing with the hybrid car BS. People always want to say, well, what's the return on investment of a Prius? And it's like, well, what's the return on investment of a Corvette? When you buy a car that's $20,000 more than a Yaris, where's the return on investment? There's something else there, and it needs to not. They deflect the issue that some people buy it because they want to be a part of the solution, and some people, if you are, I can tell you the return on investment of a solar array is infinitely more than a granite countertop. Yeah, it may increase the sale of the house, the price of the house on down, but it doesn't increase it more than the investment. Whereas now we're starting to get appraisal data out of California that a house with the renewable energy system is appraising higher than the investment of the renewable energy system. So you plop it on, and all of a sudden people are saying, oh, I pay more for that house because it's got a solar array because the electric bill is half. And they're willing to pay more than you invested into the solar array. So it's even further amplifies this savings approach. This is just another example of the same thing. You have a solar company puts the array on the building. There's, they sell the power, they sell the incentives, and then behind the solar company you have, the manufacturer, the installer, and the investors. So it's just. I wanted you not to read the text, but just to see how complicated these things are. But once more, just like solar in and of itself, once more and more people do this, it will become a more standard issue. People will get it, and there will be financing. And who's going to do that? Well, I think that the government needs to help. I don't think they need to create banks or anything like that, but they need to make it easier for banks to invest. Because right now, we got the first bank in New Hampshire to invest in a PPA, which is a power purchase agreement, which is the term for what we do. That took 12 months, literally 12 months. It took 12 months before that to find the bank. I mean, we talked to every bank in the state. We talked to Ocean Bank, we talked to Citizens Bank, we talked to all of them. And some of them even had supposedly energy programs. And they always found a way to make ours not fit in the program. And once we got time to sit down with a banker at Provident Bank, she was able to understand what we were doing. She was able to see that other states were doing it and other banks were lending on it. And they were willing to make that investment. And so those examples need to be replicated. And so that's kind of where I see the future of financing these kind of projects going. And I believe that incentives are going to be a part of it. So where I differ from the rest of the community in the renewable energy world is I'm ready to stand up, just like Wes suggested. If we're not going to eliminate all incentives for all energy sources, then the renewable energy system needs to say, these incentives are going to decline. That decline is going to be based on the market transformation. So as prices come down, the incentives should come down. Because that does two things. One, it doesn't penalize the early investor. So if I'm an early investor and I get the incentive, and then 5 years later, the other guy invests and he gets the same incentive, but the price has gone down, that's not fair to the early investor. So you almost have to protect the early investor and say, look, if you do this 5 years later, you're not going to get as much. That guy gets a lot because he helped start the whole thing. You, not so much. And that's really fair. So in a way, it's kind of fair to have the incentives go down. And this is hard for New Hampshire, but every time I go to the legislature, I don't go up there and say, we need all the money you can give us. I go up there and always say, stop screwing around with it. Because I leave here, you pass a bill, there's 18 months before I put a solar panel up on school Y or building X and company G, or whatever. So if you guys meet again in 12 months and you mess with the law that you just did today, we're going to lose that project. And the legislature needs to stop thinking in its legislative terms. It needs to say, if we're really going to start a type of economy in this state, we need to think like financial people. And so that's why I did this whole thing about financial intelligence. And they really need to come up with a bipartisan solution so that when the power swings, we don't get the Democrats going in. I'm worried, quite frankly, that the Democrats may jack the incentives up. And I will be there saying, please, make sure it's something that both parties can stomach, because, like I said, when I leave here and go try and do projects, I don't want to hear you guys coming and doing something draconian, a year from now, because you'll kill us. And these are New Hampshire citizens. They're going to be out of jobs. And then my last piece is always that comment about trying to catch the falling knife. If you have to increase incentives because it's costing more to do something, something's not working. It's supposed to work in the opposite. You create an incentive because it's too expensive now, but that you see in the long term it's going to start going down. And so that's why I really like to focus on, solar panels may cost a lot for people. I mean, I don't know when the last time somebody built a nuclear power plant in their backyard was, but they see that investment. The key is, once you build it, the fuel is free. Whereas every other, like I've said 100 times today, every other fuel source, it's the fuel source that's causing the increase in prices. So, just to kind of hammer this home, this was kind of there's no science to this. This is kind of in-house. This is, you look back in time, what is the price per kilowatt? People in 1990 were paying almost, 20 grand for a 1 kilowatt system. This is like nowadays 4 panels, but back then it was like 9. So we're seeing the price come down, and here, in this area, we're seeing it get down to that magical $1 a watt, which is what everybody's target is. And as you notice, when you get out to here, this slope is going to taper off, because it's obviously not. If it continued on this trajectory, in 2025 it would be free. It's clearly not going to be free. So, in order to understand the incentives, you need to think, okay, well, here it was just like magic, so we'll throw some money at it. If we want to transform the market, we need to raise the incentives to the point that we get market transformation. Then once it starts happening, we want to taper them off a little bit and then slowly get rid of them. So that's a rational incentive curve to me. And so what does that do to our first number? It shows you that whole concept of, well, if I invest in 2010, the guy in 2015 still gets an incentive. He may have a lower cost, but my overall cost is the same, because I've saved energy for 5 years, even though this guy has a lower cost. So I'm not getting penalized for doing it in advance. The shaking is going to kill me. And then essentially, we're going to get this flat line where the cost savings are going to be minimal. People come up with a little creative stuff to make it better, but it's never going to become free. And that's what we're trying to do, to get to that flat. I don't think we really want to talk about this. But I will talk about this. The problem in New Hampshire, and this I can tell you from experience in my company, size does matter, that's what that says. We did a 25 kilowatt array at the Great Bay Community College, your sister campus down in Portsmouth. We did a 500 kilowatt array at an ice rink in Massachusetts. The complexities were the same, because we have to have a contract with the college. That has to go through review. We have to have a contract with the ice rink. That has to go through review their terms. It doesn't matter how big or small your array is with the way we finance projects. It's going to be expensive. And so the problem with that is one of the things that we really haven't tried to figure out. We've tried, but we really haven't figured out. And so the unfortunate reality here is it forces companies like ours to have small and large projects, or come up with some way to make the project so regimented that it's just here it is in a box. Sign it if you want it. If you don't. And that's really where you got to get to in smaller projects like this, or we're not going to be able to do this kind of complicated financing for these smaller size systems, and we have to continue to operate in this area. Now, building on theory I talked about earlier, the more of these we do, these people will become more familiar with them. It won't be like rocket science, and hopefully it'll become easier. But there's really no government program that helps with that. That's kind of a market issue. So that's one of the things that really is out there that we haven't really kind of figured out what the best path is towards resolution, because this financing mechanism, like I said, requires the same complexity no matter the size of the project. So these, like I said, these are really the, when you look to finance systems, the coordinated approach with everybody, financial intelligence of all parties, especially the legislature, sustaining incentives, and again, I talked about, regulatory barriers to financing has to do with, does so-and-so have the authority to sign a contract like this? Are the rules and regulations at the utility level okay to allow these types of arrangements to go on? That I don't want to get into, because I'm more concerned about showing you how the financing idea is looking at the whole project from a different perspective and then bringing up the pieces, bits and pieces. Because efficiency kind of works the same way. People pay money to do efficiency or to build a house more efficient so that they can pay less in the future. We just do it in solar so much more fun because we can slap a meter on it and we monitor it and we just build. It's the same thing utility does. Efficiency is a little harder because it's harder to meter efficiency. You have to engineer it and guess, and that makes more sense to do efficiency from a use standpoint. But from understanding this financing mechanism, a device that actually produces a meterable amount of energy is a much easier way to explain it. If you watch the Shark Tank, I got to tell you about this. So the Shark Tank is 5 rich people, and these entrepreneurs come in, and you pitch your business idea to these 5 guys. One of them is Mark Cuban, the guy who owns the Dallas Mavericks, and a couple other people. But this guy, Kevin O'Leary, calls himself Mr. Wonderful. He's awesome. He's just a real jerk. And he goes through this thing, and he always says, for that reason, I'm out, and so he won't do the deal. And so, this presentation kind of originated because I knew when I first gave it, there were some legislators in the room, and I was trying to make the point that, these kind of people are the people that we need, not Kevin O'Leary specifically, but people who have money that want to come and invest in our state. Because that's what they all scream about. We need jobs, we need businesses, and my point is to them, well, unless you do all this, none of these people are going to come. So you can talk about how much you like it, but if you don't do what you need to do to make it happen, it's not going to happen. We spend millions and millions of dollars going after manufacturing jobs, which is fine, but there are projects just dying to happen on the renewable energy side. I showed you, it works, it can work. There are a lot of houses in New Hampshire that don't have solar on them that could. And there's a lot of ways to do this to make it work, and we could really create a different kind. It's only a small segment, but it would at least jumpstart that whole idea. And so I try to package this all up and say, it's real, people are doing it other places, we could be doing it, we don't, and it's very easy to fix. And that supposedly should make some people wake up, but it has yet to do that. So that's how I believe financing these systems is going to happen in the future. Like I said, unfortunately for Wes, in the past, it's always been me and Eric Stelzer who have come up here, and Eric's got this whole list of all these programs, and they're all gone, because the Recovery Act was gone. And even to the extent that they're even there, I wouldn't look at them as a long-range plan. There's not million, we have $18 million in New Hampshire that don't have solar on them that could. And there's a lot of ways to do this to make it work, and we could really create a different kind. It's only a small segment, but it would at least jumpstart that whole idea. And so I try to package this all up and say, it's real, people are doing it other places, we could be doing it, we don't, and it's very easy to fix. And that supposedly should make some people wake up, but it has yet to do that. So that's how I believe financing these systems is going to happen in the future. Like I said, unfortunately for Wes, in the past, it's always been me and Eric Stelzer who have come up here, and Eric's got this whole list of all these programs, and they're all gone, because the Recovery Act is gone. And even to the extent that they're even there, I wouldn't look at them as a long-range plan. There's not million, we have $18 million to spend in this state. Never again. It's probably 200,000 now. And that's not the way you think about it. The way to think about it is a market-based response to how we get these things going. So it's really kind of, it's doing these types of systems and going after things like installation costs and other programs like that. So that, I realize I hurled, I have a tendency to just talk very fast once I get going. Any questions?
How do the third-party electric companies that are coming in, how are they comparing the price that you can offer?
They are, they're very close.
You know, is it more, if you go to a school and say, I can do this, but then that third party goes there and says, well, I can do the same thing without having to put the store. That's the thing, there's a stigma to the look of it.
Right.
A lot of people don't like the look of it. I don't like the look of it. But there's, so they're coming very close to what your costs.
They are, but
What are their costs going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
right, like in Exeter, the array I showed you at Exeter, that contract is only 10 years long, and we're 4 years into it, so we have 6 more years. At the end of 6 years, their price is 0 because they own the array. They get it. Yeah, there'll be some maintenance stuff, but the maintenance amounts to cleaning it twice a year and mowing the grass in there 4 times a year. They're already mowing the grass, so that's irrelevant. The cleaning, probably, I think we're paying $600 a clean, so that's $1,200 a year for $50,000 in electricity, and that's the difference. The difference is once you've paid off your investment of the solar array, the energy is free, and that's the reason why I like to use the mortgage. I didn't even talk about what happens at the end of 30 years when your mortgage is paid off and you're not paying for the array, then your electricity is free. Let's assume that the financing, let's assume the solar array comes down at 30 years. You've still saved $1,500 a year for 30 years. That's $65,000. And that assumes that the electric rate stays flat. How likely is that? So yeah, you're right. We have a tough challenge with those guys because people are looking at it. But occasionally we get the forward-thinking CFO who says, okay, wait, I could pay 0.5 cent more today for the next 10 years, and then for the next 25 years, I can pay 17 cents less. Okay, I get it. Or they'll say, all right, well, the only reason our price is so close is because it's 10 years. If you make our contract 20 years, then we're way lower. If you make our contract 25 years, we're lower even more. So it's all about, there's an elasticity to the formula. The length of the contract drives up the kilowatt hour rate. If you extend the contract, it reduces the rate.
Is there any mechanism for transfer? I mean, I know there are for some formal programs, but if, say you're going to a homeowner in Massachusetts, you got a 20-year contract with them, the average person lives in a house for 7 years. Is there any formal mechanism so that you can keep it with the meter?
Yes. There are 2 options. Most of these, we don't do residential scale projects, primarily because we haven't tried to figure that out, but I know that the companies that do them, they leave the homeowner with 2 options. One is they'll come and remove the system. So technically, I think there are 3. One is they'll remove the system. The second is they'll tell the new homeowner or the old homeowner that they can buy out the remainder of the lease. And so the new homeowner can finance the remainder of the lease when they purchase the house. So they give the money to the solar company, and now they get the solar array for free. So now they get the free solar array with other things. And then the third is they can just step into the lease or the power payment. So they can say, you know what, I like that deal. 10 cents a kilowatt versus 16, I'll take it. And so they just sign up and they get it. And so the solar company has a lien on the equipment recorded at the registry. So everybody's aware of the fact that this solar array belongs to another company, and they can either buy it, have it removed, or step into the lease.
We went to the deep retrofit conference a couple weeks ago, and there was a lot of real estate agents there. And the real estate market is starting to understand these different benefits that aren't visible. Like the deep energy retrofit isn't visible, but it's a benefit of the house.
Right.
And there are real estate agents that are able to market that in the selling of the house, which needs to be done. They need to understand
The next step is the appraisers and the banks. They need to realize that, and the sad thing is, well, especially in the last decade, we've been loaning money to people at a rate that we shouldn't be loaning it to them. And now I realize that I'm proposing that we loan even more money to people. But if first of all, let's get out of the subprime mortgage BS. If a bank is going to give somebody $250 based on this calculation, because this is what you do when you get a mortgage, how much is your cost, what's your budget, and that we determine how much we can pay for your financing. Well, if your budget drops, then obviously you can pay more money for the financing. So the bank has to take into account, this person is going to pay $4,000 a year for utilities, this person is going to pay $2,000. So of course we're going to loan them more money because they're paying less on utilities. So, and those people don't know it yet. They're the hardest ones, the appraisers and the bankers, awful. You know, the whole industry is like locked in the 40s or something. And it just, you can't, they're the ones who don't think solar works. Well, if I showed that presentation before they were said, well, what about Solyndra? And it's like, oh my God, are you kidding? You know, that's where we are with some of these industries.
The banks and the appraisers and the real estate agents, to a certain extent, are just looking at their bottom line, what they're going to make on the front.
Right. And the bank makes more. That's the funny part about the bank. In this scenario, the bank makes more because they're loaning more, and they got a more secure home loan because they're saving $1,500. That's 10% almost, you know? That's not peanuts when we're talking about making loans and, you know, add a couple of zeros to that, and you're doing 100 mortgages a year. You know, now we're talking, you know, 28 million versus 25 million. That's a lot of money for doing nothing. But thinking. You know? Forward thinking. Yeah, I should kind of, yeah. So,
you had mentioned something about the tax, like property tax. There should be property tax if you put up a solar array.
You could get an exemption. That assumes they're even going to charge more. I mean, most assessors go out there and say, I don't know what that is, and they won't even do it. But if they do know what it is, and they try to assign a value, if your town has adopted the exemption, you can file for an exemption and get that taken off your taxes.
We had just the exact opposite experience when we did a deep energy retrofit. We had the appraiser come out and, you know, give us about 10 cents more in value. And when I asked him why, he says, I can't appraise it at a higher value unless people are going to recognize it as a higher value, and nobody recognizes it yet as a higher value. So you get the market to recognize it, and I'll recognize it. It's like a
yeah, it's a terrible circle. And the other thing is, you know, when you're talking about financing, one group you want to recognize the value, the other group you kind of don't want to recognize the value. You can't let those games be played. You got to say, look, this adds value to the house because it saves us money. We're willing to pay more property taxes on that. But we think because these are new, that our town should adopt an exemption. I mean, I hesitate to say this because sounds inflammatory. We give people exemptions because they're aged, you know, and why? Because they have a hard time, you know, people that are older live on fixed incomes, and so we have a public policy for that. The same thing with people. I mean, is this one of the things? Veterans, I can't touch that. We don't give people who serve in our country enough benefits, and so whatever they can get, they can get. But, you know, I think that solving this energy problem and people taking that into their own hands, I don't think that, you know, that is a justification for contributing more money to the town's fiscal situation. You know, I think there are other, you know, if you want to build a very expensive house and it's just flat out more expensive, you know, your granite countertops and stuff like that, yeah, you pay a tax on that because that's like a luxury item. But this is like a functional part of the solution item that shouldn't really be taxed, in my opinion. And I think our tax policy is flexible like that, you know, and it can absorb those kind of public policy differences.
Do you see some way that when we start taking carbon into the mix, if we've got a carbon tax, should there be a carbon benefit for not? In other words, if I'm purchasing electricity and you're through that plant that we saw, the Bow Power plant there, and you're getting your electricity from a PV system, there's a difference not only in the cost of the fuel, but in the cost to society of the carbon. I know this is way down the road, but would there be some mechanism where we could use that as the rationale, for lack of a better word, for not taxing it at the same level?
Yeah, because you would assign the tax to the polluter. So the power plant, which is emitting the carbon, would have to pay the tax. Therefore, they'd have to pass that cost on to the users of their power. And so it'll drive people away from their power, which will send a market signal back to the plant that we don't want this kind of stuff going on. The cost to recover from all these, whether it's storms or climate or, reduced water heads, whatever, the carbon situation is causing, and, unless you're an oil company, even the oil companies, with the new CEO of Exxon just finally released a comment and said, we're ready for a carbon tax. So the only people in denial about carbon and the impact on the climate is like the right honorable senator from Oklahoma, and those kind of people. And it's like, really, we tax stupider things. Why don't we tax carbon and try and do our part to limit that output? And so, yeah, I think that's, we tax tobacco, we tax alcohol, all that other kind of stuff. There's enough evidence to show the devastation of carbon, so why tax it? And that's what happens. That's why we tax cigarettes and alcohol, ostensibly, because it's a burden on society and it costs people money, and so we need more taxes to offset that kind of stuff. It's just like, this always gets me in trouble in New Hampshire. I think people who don't wear helmets with a motorcycle should pay a tax. If you don't, that's a lot of money. A head injury costs a lot of money, and whenever I go to Massachusetts in the summer and I see motorcyclists come across a border, pull over, take their helmets off, and then take off, and it's just like, oh, really? Come on. I get the whole freedom thing, but we license people who do fingernails, but then we let people ride around without helmets on, and it's just like, that's a burden on society, in my opinion. If you have adequate health insurance, you're willing to pay your own way for a head injury, fine. But if you're going to go in the emergency room and you don't have health insurance, it's going to cost $250,000. I'm paying for that, you're paying for that, we're all paying for it. And that's really how government is supposed to work, I think. We're getting way off energy right now.
I heard a guy speak who was involved in the transplant registry, and he was saying if you want if you need a quick transplant, the best thing to do is to move to a state where there's no motorcycle helmet law.
Yeah, it's proven over and over and over again that the per capita cost for healthcare is so much higher in states that don't have the helmet law, because it's always such a devastating injury, and it's sad. I get it, but I understand the thrill of riding a motorcycle, but without a helmet, it's tough. But the point of that is not about motorcycles and helmets. It's about we as a state do these bizarre things with freedom and tax. And then we have this horrible, weird debate about carbon, and it's just like, I don't understand. It promotes things that mean a lot to us. It helps. It creates a new economy. Those are all reasons worthy of changing the tax structure as we deal with those particular items.
So, just as a review, I know it's not the way we want to ultimately go, but what are the tax credits now?
So, the tax credits now for there's two different kinds, and we wow. So we have two different kinds of tax and incentive structures here. You get, in New Hampshire, let's just do this through New Hampshire. You get a rebate, which is, let's say this, let's make this simpler. Sorry. So this is 1 kW. So if this is a 1 kilowatt system on a house, and this is a 12 kilowatt system on a business. You get a rebate in New Hampshire that's $750 because it's 75 cents a watt DC or something like that. I think the commercial is 80. So just for purposes of the exercise, let's just go through it. So 80 is 9,600. Is that right? Yeah. And then you get to the tax credits. So do you know how tax credit works? You get down to you get to your adjusted gross income. That's a number. that number corresponds to a tax rate. The adjusted gross income times your tax rate equals how much tax you owe. So if you owe $10,000 in tax, your AGI is what led to that. So above the adjusted gross income is all of your income minus deductions. So if you have an income of $100,000 and you have deductions for your mortgage at $10,000 and other and child deductions and all these things, you end up with your adjusted gross income. So a deduction is equal to that number times your tax rate. So if your tax rate is 30%, the value of a $10,000 deduction is $3,000, right? Does that make sense? So a tax credit is a direct offset of your tax bill. So if I have a tax credit of 30%, let's say our system is $4,000, it's 30%, so it's $1,200. That goes right to your tax. So the tax credit is $1 for $1, whereas a tax deduction incentive is $1 for 30 cents. So tax credits are big, tax deductions not so big. So you get a 30% tax credit on both sides. So these guys get a tax credit as well, 30%. Then you get a deduction. You get 0 deductions for residents. But these guys get, they get accelerated, what's called MAKERS, Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery. And that is 5 years. So you take the total value of the system and divide it into 5, and then you get a deduction. So, but the deduction is 30%. So let's just say that it is roughly the net present value of the deductions are $10,000, right? That times 30% factored out over 5 years. 5 years, and now you end up with your final sum. So you get, so on the residential side, we're looking at $2,150 for your 1 kilowatt array. And on the business side, we're looking at $9,400. So 1/4 and half. So you can see that the tax structure has a big deal. Now, so the problem with tax incentives, like I said before, is you've got to have a tax bill due. So if you're not making money, or you're a student, or your business is failing, and you don't have a tax incentive, you can't realize these benefits. So that's a tough problem in a tough economy. If you don't have a tax bill, you can't take a tax credit. So one of the most powerful things in the Recovery Act, this stimulus bill, was they took this 30% tax credit and they just sent you a check once you put the system in. They gave you 60 days, they reviewed it, they said, okay, we'll just send you a check. You don't get a tax credit, but you get a tax. It was called the Section 1603 tax grant, is what they called it. And that's what fueled the solar industry for 2 years, and that expired at the end of last year. And now we're back into this market where we can only work with businesses that have the taxes so they can take the deductions. So that's why you've seen all these solar companies going out of business, because the solar market was going gangbusters while this was in place. But it expires, the economy hasn't come back, and so there's not enough people doing projects. But you can see the impact of the tax incentives. So tax credit, tax deduction, you don't get it on the residential side, tax credit and the deduction on the commercial side. And then the state rebates here and here. So now we get back to my original calculation here. So now you got that residential homeowner, and instead of doing the 15 grand, we're really talking about 6 or 7. So it's like, it's off the charts how much this makes sense, as long as the homeowner can take advantage of the tax savings. I guess my final point is, it shouldn't be this complicated, but it is. And so that's where companies like ours are born. This is all we focus on. We try to make it simple. We try and take the complexities out so that people understand how it goes. But it's really, right now is the time for businesses to be doing solar, if they have a tax burden. Because financing this for a 12 kW system, that's great. That's a breeze. And I told you about how the incentives should go down. Well, the price of solar has come down, but the incentives haven't really started going down yet. And so we're in this kind of weird state where solar's really cheap, and the incentives are really high. It's time to do it, because the incentives are going to start ratcheting down, because people are going to, once the economy starts coming back, I think people are going to start taking a look and say, okay, enough with the incentives, let's ratchet it back a little bit. Of course, New Hampshire did the ridiculous decline of the renewable energy credit, but that was more political.
Now, you're doing more commercial, not industrial. Are you doing any industrial applications for this, or is it an offset of your regular energy, or is it just schools
Yes.
and things like that?
No, we're doing a place called Banner Mold and Dye in Leominster, Mass, which is a tool and die, kind of factory, and we're doing a 150 kilowatt ground mount
Do
rig.
they have to run their facility?
No, they'll still be using grid power. That's all the room they have. Yeah, they'll just offset it.
Most of the systems you do grid tied?
Oh yeah. We are looking at doing we won RFP, so now we're going to start trying to design the system. But Star Island, off the coast of Rye in Portsmouth, they're off grid. They're running on diesel generators. We're trying to build a combo system. 1 to 200 kilowatts of solar, a huge bank of batteries, and then a couple of really nice small propane generators maybe. And what they're using now are these monstrous cat diesels, and that's all they're running. So they're load following giant 125 kilowatt diesels. And what we want to do is put a 200 kilowatt solar array in a battery bank and basically get them running off a giant volt, like the car. That's exactly what we'll be building. Everything will run off the battery bank. The solar array will charge the battery bank. If the battery bank falls too low, it'll kick on the propane generators to charge the battery bank off, turn those off, and then just keep running 80-20, 80-20, with the generators. And as long as it's going up from the solar array, the generators will never turn on. And so you maximize the output of the solar array and let those batteries do it. And the batteries today, that's another magical thing. Batteries are 20 years zero maintenance batteries, 2,500 discharges. That's a lot of cycles in a battery bank. Normally a battery bank's just sitting there fully charged, and that's like a full discharge and recharge one. You do that 2,500 times in 20 years. It's pretty unlikely. Zero maintenance, sealed batteries, nothing to worry about, and they're still a little expensive. But once that comes down, then you're going to start seeing some interesting, developments. People will just put these on their house, and the grid will go down. And go, oh, the grid's down. Nobody will care. Because now my neighborhood, when I first moved to my neighborhood, nobody had a generator. Now everyone has a generator. Everybody has a generator on my street because we've had so many periods. I mean, being out of power for 4 days is a bizarre experience. You really kind of lose your mind if you don't have a place to go, because you still got to go to work. Because you may be out of power, but the rest of the world isn't out of power, and so you got to get to work. You got to come home. You can't wash your clothes. You got to take a shower. All these things we take for granted become clear. And going out and buying a $500 generator is not that big a deal when you're dealing with that kind of stuff.
9 days we were out in the ice storm.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's crazy. And so,
Other questions? Other thoughts on potential ways of financing? How about residential financing in New Hampshire?
I think it's going to, for the short term, it's going to be people doing home equity loans. I think that the state incentive is stable and it's good and it's making progress. There are companies like ours that do residential financing, like Sunrun, Sungevity, Solar City. But the reason we don't hear about them is they do it in states that have bigger state rebates. And for a long time, it was really funny. People were even solar people were saying, "Well, that'll never work. It'll never work." But now that the prices have come down even farther than people had thought, it's working. And the investors behind those three companies, one of them is Elon Musk, the Tesla guy. The other two are Lowe's and Home Depot. And then there's a fourth company that's starting to come out, which is being backed by none other than Google. So those are not for idiots. Lowe's and Home Depot, you know where that's going. You're going to be able to walk into a Lowe's and a Home Depot, finance a solar array, buy it off the shelf there, and get somebody to install it. Same way they do carpet and all the other stuff. It's brilliant. And and that's what's going to happen.
When I was a pup, one of my first jobs in this field was with Sears Solar.
Really?
Sears had a solar hot water. This is Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan days, and they'd call you up at dinner time and bug you for an appointment, and they'd give us. This was, you got to understand, the 80s.
Yeah.
They'd give us solar calculators as freebies. You go out, usually people would open the door this far and want you to hand them the solar calculator. They had no more intent. But the bottom line was there was a 40% tax credit. In Massachusetts, there was a 35% on top of that. I mean, it was pretty significant. And you go out, you do the numbers, and they'd come out and install them on your roof.
Yeah, it's great. Well,
and by the way, excuse me for interrupting, I talked within the last 5 years to a guy who we put one on in Salem, New Hampshire. He had a horse farm. He was using about 1,000 gallons of oil a year or a summer for his horses. He hasn't used a gallon since. This was maybe 5 years ago. It was longer than that because it was right before I started here. He hadn't used a gallon of oil in the summer for hot water from 1980 through 2004, let's say.
Yeah, and how much did that guy save in that period? Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
So that's brilliant. Sears is way ahead of its time. I actually, proved oil and propane in Newmarket did this for a little bit, and I see the fuel companies doing it. I mean, if I was a fuel delivery company, that's what I'd do. I'd say, look, we deliver fuel, but we really want to be delivering energy. Notice how Lamprey Oil changed their name to Lamprey Energy. But we deliver energy. We'll finance a thermal system. We'll offset our own oil bill or in our own propane use, but you gotta finance it through us. And that way, they're capturing. That's why it's beautiful for a fuel company. They're capturing their customer because the customer has to stay with them because they finance the solar array with them. And yeah, they offset their fuel price, but they have that customer. The problem with the oil companies and the fuel delivery companies, customers, switch around. And so everybody, you never have a steady income. You never know how many people are going to be your customers, and you never know what that fuel rate is. But if you switch people over to renewables and your fuel, now all of a sudden, you know how much money you're getting because you're getting the money from the buying the solar array. And you probably are going to keep that customer on the other side of the equation because the customer sees you as, these people help me get off the very fuel that I'm using. So I've either got to stay with them because of the financing arrangement is that way, or I owe them a certain amount of loyalty because they're continuing to do it. So the techs are already there. It's just, I always thought that the fuel companies would be an interesting, kind of just blanket solar thermal distribution system.
Any questions? Thank you so much. This was excellent.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice meeting you guys. Good luck. It's a good field that you're in. Trust me, there's not enough people doing this stuff, and there's a lot of jobs out there. It's just there's not a lot here in this state, but if you're willing to travel, I mean, everywhere I go, there's people companies down in Massachusetts looking for people, and it's going to do this. Everything was inflated by the Recovery Act's focus on energy efficiency, and now, while that kind of tapers out, there's going to be a correction, and then it's going to slowly creep back up because so many people did efficiency projects that everybody starts to understand it, and I believe that this market is coming back. So my pitch for this whole idea and the program and everything like that is, we are going to be held back by the amount of trained professionals out there dealing with this kind of stuff. So I don't know where you're ultimately trying to end up with in your careers and fields or but this is going to be, there's so much more possibilities in this world on this kind of stuff.
Excellent. Thanks again.
We did